Hey, welcome back to Weeby Kids again. Last week I came up to the woods to tell you a story that I wrote called The Spruce and the Star, and it was a story for our times. But this week I'm going to tell you a different story, and this story certainly isn't from our times. This is a very, very, very old story that was told across the northern lands at around about this time of year. But sadly it has been forgotten, and with it some traditions that were attached to the story have been forgotten too. So this story is a story that is close to my heart, and this story is called The Dear Mother. Now this story happened on the darkest, longest night of the coldest, harshest winter. All of the creatures of the forest were usually underground, keeping themselves warm in the earth at this time of year. But it was so cold that even the earth had frozen solid. All the water had frozen solid too. And all the animals had come out from hibernation and were sitting in a big glade, huddled together to keep warm. And while they were huddled together, out on the edges, the smaller creatures lay. And it was still in the huddle when all of a sudden there was a lot of movement on the edges, and one of the creatures started burrowing its way through all the others to the centre. And there in the centre was the great bear. And this creature that burrowed through was the fox, and the fox bumped up against the great bear. Said, "Great bear, something must be done. The small creatures on the edge of the huddle, they won't make it through the night if we don't do something. They are too weak and they are too cold." And the great bear agreed. The great bear said, "Somebody, one of the creatures, we have to head to the southern isles and bring back the sun." And the fox agreed. And the bear stood up. He said, "Which of us will head south to bring back the sun and break this winter?" There was silence. And the fox said, "It must be one of the creatures who can travel fast, who has a courageous heart, and who can bring the sun back." "Yes," said the bear, "and also a creature who can travel long distances." "Yes." The fox said, "Maybe it should be a bird. Birds can travel far." And the fox called out to the raven and said, "Raven, will you go?" The raven said, "The birds are too weak, and even if we could go, there is no way that we could bring the sun back, for it would burn our beaks and it would burn our feathers." So the bear asked again, "Who will head to the southern isles and bring back the sun?" And there was silence. And then off towards the edge of the huddle, there was movement and a rustle, and a big creature stood up with beautiful white and brown fur, a big wet black nose, and velvety antlers that reached skyward. This animal was the reindeer. And the reindeer looked at the bear and said, "I will go." And the bear said, "Yes, you shall go, reindeer." And the fox said, "Yes, reindeer, you can go. You have a courageous heart. You can travel long distances. You are fast. But how will you bring back the sun?" And the reindeer lowered its head. It said, "You see these antlers? They are perfect for holding the sun. I will bring the sun back in my antlers and warm the northern lands." And they all agreed. And the bear raised its hands and said, "Brother reindeer, you have my blessing." And the reindeer looked with wide eyes at the great bear and said, "Great bear, don't you know anything of the herds of the reindeer? In the winter, the male reindeers shed their antlers They could not do this. It is I who must go, and I am not brother reindeer, but mother deer. And with that she turned, and she sauntered southward through the forest. And she walked and walked through the dark, cold night with one thing in mind, to get to the sun. But it was so far away, the southern isles could be days and days of walking. But onward she went with her courageous and brave heart. And she'd walk for hours, when off in the distance she heard something in the forest. She walked through until again she saw a clearing, and there in the clearing was a big burly man, dressed in a long green cloak made of all of the plants of the forest, and he wore a big green hood. He had long grey white matted hair and a big grey white matted beard. He was carrying a sack. This man looked like he'd been in the forest for a long time, years, maybe decades, maybe even centuries. And the man saw Mother Deer, and immediately he went down on one knee, for he knew of her power and her strength, and that she should be respected and revered. And he lay his head and he said, "Mother Deer, what are you doing in the forest? Normally at this time of year you are out on the plains." And Mother Deer told the man of her journey to the southern isles. And he said, "But that could take weeks and weeks. If you were to save the forest and all the creatures, you must go quicker. Let me help, for I know the magic of the forest." And Mother Deer agreed. And the man reached into his big sack and he looked around, and then he pulled out a huge mushroom with a big red head covered in white spots. And he said to Mother Deer, "Eat this mushroom and you will have the magic of the forest." And she did. She ate the mushroom. And she thanked the man of the forest. And she went southward. And this time she began to run. And she ran and she ran and she dodged through the trees until she came to a big opening like this. And something in her heart told her to run faster and faster, and she did. And she ran faster towards the trees, but she didn't crash into the trees. Just before she entered the forest again, she went skyward and began to fly over the treetops. Down below she could see the valleys and the long distant northlands covered in ice. And southward she flew until on the horizon she could see the sun. And she flew up to the sun and she said, "Sun goddess, please return to the northern lands. This winter and this night has been so long. If you don't come back soon, we will perish." And the sun goddess said, "But I am so tired. I have spent all of the last 6 months warming the southern isles. I don't have the energy to move that quick." And Mother Deer again lowered her head and said to the sun goddess, "Climb into my antlers and I will carry you north." And with that, the sun goddess climbed into the antlers. And Mother Deer turned, and as quickly as she had gone south, she returned north. And as she returned north, the light of the sun began to break the darkness. A beautiful sunrise appeared. The northern forest was warmed, and all was well. Hope you enjoyed that story. It's a really, really lovely story, and it's a folk story that has been told for many, many, many years across the northern lands. And we know that because the Mother Deer is still revered in some places to these days. Scandinavia and Russia and Mongolia. And we also know that when we look back in time and we can see the artwork and the paintings and the stories that were left behind by the ancient people, we see the mother deer depicted at this time of year, carrying the sun in her antlers, and also her antlers depicted as the tree of life. So it's a really lovely story, and one that I hope that we can keep going so that people remember the tradition of the mother deer and how close she is to us as humans. Hope you enjoyed the story. Thanks for stopping by at Weeby Kids, and we'll see you again sometime soon. Bye!